started this as a joint kind of a project in which all of us participated, but in the process it has taken its own, there is a certain momentum it has taken, and it's important for us to sort of touch base and take stock of where we are heading, and then see whether all of us are on the same page. And obviously we may not be on the same page, so it's important for us to, through this discussion, arrive at some consensus. That's how I look at the purpose of this 2 days deliberations. The focus of the 2 days workshop is of course action research for the EFIL program, but I think it's important for us to see the genesis of the book, where we all began. I think it began essentially with development professionals finding, trying to. It's like 7 actors in search of a director. If you've seen that. Play, it is something like that. Pradhan and the larger development, rural development or development practice community have been wanting to place itself on some kind of a professional footing and take steps to sort of professionalize the whole practice. That is, I think, where it started. And Pradhan's own apprenticeship program was many years of endeavor towards this. At some point, Pradhan and been working with Pradhan, and when I say Pradhan, I don't just mean Pradhan, but also similar organizations elsewhere. Must have found that it's important for us to sort of now consolidate this whole area of practice into what may be called a profession. And by profession we understand that there has to be a certain amount of structuring and standardizing of the body of knowledge that we use and we are oriented in, we apply. We also mean to consolidate our position as members of a collective, and that collective gets formed usually by certain common experiential trajectory that they have gone through, usually in the form of training. So that some kind of prolonged training in that area of knowledge, maybe broadly called the science, and in so doing we get acquainted with not merely the body of knowledge but also with a lot of a whole set of competencies that go with it, and also a certain kind of mental disposition that goes with it. So a certain attitude, a certain value, all that. So together such collective gel into what may be called a guild or a professional guild, a professional club. That's how we understand as a profession. So the first ingredient of that is actually formalizing the whole training process, and therefore very rightly Pradhan was looking out for a partner in the domain of universities where it has got a social sanction or a social authority to certify. That's how they were. That's why I said this 7 actors in search of a director kind of a situation. So the protagonist in this entire drama so far has been these the development professionals themselves, but they were also not seeking these things for their own sake. principal stakeholders, or what was its principally at stake was actually the whole rural development process. So that, I think, we need to remember. It is not just for a collective to come together and get a social sanction for that. That's not only, that must be the sort of superficial purpose, but the deeper purpose is actually to give sanctity to this whole process of development which happens, of rural transportation. In their pursuit of the various partners, eventually, I think, fortuitously or otherwise, I think we came together. Medicare University also had, was then a recent phenomenon. Even now it's a recent phenomenon. It's a nascent kind of phenomenon. So we came together and explored possibilities. Since we did not have our own deep set notions about what we are and how we should go about things, since we were still young, it was possible for our infant mind, the university's infant mind, to begin to imagine some newer possibilities. Because if you were a little well set already, then there would have been a certain entrenchment in the way we function, and it would have been more difficult, that much more difficult for us to sort of deviate from the kinds of the trodden path which universities are normally used to. So it is easier for us to sort of begin that process of imagination. Not without problems, because after all we just remember that although we are a new university, we were essentially populated by people who were oriented in old institutions. So we brought with us into this new university certain legacy of our own notions about what is supposed to be university education. So we had to go through a kind of a self-interrogative process, and eventually to arrive at a consensus as to what the shape of this such a professional development program would be. And that was a protracted process. Some of you were active participants in that process, and others probably would have been privy to what happens in those. But eventually we arrived at this MPhil program. So the MPhil program in a way was a consequence of that process. You might wonder why I am starting from these first principles, because it's important for us to sort of, it's like a soap opera, because I think we need to really we enter and exit at various points in the story, so it's important for us to begin at the beginning. The MPhil in the development practice program in a way consolidated within its structure, its architecture, its this whole aspiration of creating professionally trained development practitioners. And the whole architecture of this program comprised, I think, majorly three components. One was this whole this whole idea of pushing people into the deep end of the field and finding for themselves their bearings. And in the process, we sort of deal with only those people who have propensity to swim. And so there is a certain selection process, there is a certain rigor that is attached to the selection process, and also this initial field immersion slap, which is essentially to sort of wean out people who are the weak-hearted, so to say. And then the subsequent field immersion component, which is the unique, the USP of this program, is essentially to sort of enable these young aspirants to deal with the complexities of the field situations and learn the ropes of the by actually engaging with the problems that they face in the day to day, and in so doing they are being scaffolded by the Pradhan's own functionaries who are already active in the field. So that's the whole idea as far as I know. And with these correct me if I'm going wrong in any of these things, because every one of us may have a different definition of what exactly. So the field immersion is therefore a first major component, and that is supposed to develop in the aspirants the basic competency sets and also the attitudinal aspects, the value aspects, the emotional aspects, through an experiential process, an active experiential process. Because learning is not all cognitive, learning is through the whole being, and that's what is being. That's the assumption behind this immersion process. But balancing that immersion process is the taught courses, which are basically campus-based, compared to university-based, where the aspirants get an exposure to, and hopefully they are enabled to, or there's an enablement to develop in them a certain analytical perspective, a certain analytical framework, conceptual categories, theories, learning from experiences, documented experiences. So the whole literature, so to say, which comprises all these components, there's an exposure, methodical, systematic exposure to these things. But it follows a certain different logic. That logic is usually, the logic is, in my opinion, informed by a different tradition, the academic tradition. Just like there's a structure in this logic of taught courses, there's also a structure in the field immersion. Field immersion is already according to a certain a scheme which Pradhan's intervention appears, and it has got the formation of self-help groups, working through them, reaching the community through them. So there's also a structure there. Similarly, there's also a structure. So these two becomes the two major components, the field immersion and the taught courses. The field immersion being aiming at, I'm just recapitulating, aiming at development of competency sets and the emotional and other dispositional aspects, and so also an opportunity for people to sort of begin to interrogate themselves, question themselves, because only when you are actually faced with situations you begin to ask yourself. Thought course on the side, in my opinion, is actually building them with analytical perspectives, conceptual categories, theories, a consolidated view of related experiences, documented experiences, etc. So those are the kinds of things we can do. The third component of the central program is what may be called the dissertation work, which is actually, a dissertation is supposed to be a culmination of synthesis of both these things, and basically it is to give the aspirant practitioner a glimpse of the actual experience of a full-fledged professional. So the full-fledged professional on a day-to-day basis does what may be called a reflective practice, and that reflective practice happens in a uncontrolled situation where there are lots of intertwined variables, and you need to make sense of it, they need to make sense of it and work with it. But a training ground where with all its complexities may not be possible. So we are actually in it's all telescoped into a 4 months slam, 4 months module, which has got in some sense in a semi-controlled mode. The aspirants are exposed to the actual field situations, where they are themselves the major protagonists, working with the community and arriving at a transformative process, or initiating a transformative process, which is which is in a way like in a participatory mode and also in a planning. So documenting this entire participatory process, the transformative process, is the final product of that is the dissertation. And we thought that action research would lend itself, with its own methodological traditions, would lend itself to this kind of a process. So that's what we have been pursuing. But in so doing, we realized at some point that we have not really we have used these categories as almost self-explanatory. When we say action research, it becomes self-explanatory. But that is probably not so true, particularly because in this entire training program, there are two categories of facilitators who are there. One is the field guides, who are scaffolding the aspirants' actual work in the field, and the others are this faculty supervisors from Ambedkar University, who are also scaffolding insofar as the perspectives are concerned, the theoretical understanding, the perspectives, the conceptual categories, the vocabulary, all these things are concerned. And because after all these have to be eventually in the tradition of professional communications, which need not have to be quote unquote purely academic, but also it follows a certain kind of intellectual tradition. So these are the two kind of scaffolding that's happening. So the people who are providing those scaffolding need to first of all talk about it, because often we find that we are talking to each other through the students, and students at times are a little overwhelmed by this, because they are not able to in a way bridge the distance between the theory and practice, so to say, or the physical and psychological distance that exists between the two kind of facilitation that happens. One is this facilitation on the part of academics and facilitation on the part of practitioners. So my objective, at least personally, I thought that our meeting together today and tomorrow would help us to sort of move towards a convergence. I don't believe that at the end of these 2 days we'll have complete convergence, but at least we'll move towards a convergence, and also we'll begin to understand each other a little better, so that it's easier for us then to talk to the students in probably what we call the one voice. So that's what I would consider. This one voice business is not completely possible, so I think, because it's always we represent. There is a value in our respective vantage points. There is a value in your field guide's perspective. There is a value in the clinician's perspective, and both these the fidelity to both these values are also important. So the students are also in a way trained to negotiate between these two. So it's a certain amount of tension that exists between these two perspectives in a way is not only inevitable but probably necessary also. So that also, so I'm not particularly afraid of this. On the contrary, I would say there's a value in our talking not so much in one voice, but at the same time, at least we must begin a communication, because our association, our working together goes beyond this MPhil program. Today, MPhil is the instrument through which we are working. Tomorrow it could be something else. So I think that process should. This in short was, and even knowing sometimes among us, your last point, where we differ, where we have small differences, like knowing among us where we have small differences, not big differences, but there may be small. Like Rajesh and I and Shyamalima, we differ on so many things. Actually, like every day, it's a householding crisis every day, because we are differing on every possible thing, and then Imran also comes in and gives one difference, so it adds more to that. So it's okay to, and using these 2 days or 1.5 days to table all this, rather than leave them all untouched. Yes. You want to add? No. So the Vedanta may have something. Yeah. No, but before okay. On this point.
I think it's very important for us to come together with primary focus being the dialogue between us. The primary focus being the dialogue between us. And this is only an initiation of that dialogue. For us to actually go to the situation. Because one is a dialogue between us and the second is the dialogue with the situation that the students find them in. The context that the students find themselves in. The dialogue needs to be located with the student in focus and also with the context, which is the process of social transformation that they are engaged in. So we need to start building bridges amongst ourselves. And the second part is which will unfold soon is the focus on building the profession, which means that if we prepare ourselves. In the action research seminars, we had one metaphor that Professor Menon used, which I found useful was. Just as to build a picture that if you're preparing people to climb the evidence, in the training in the base camp. So what will the kind of training in the base camp look like? What will the climbing culture that we create, the learning environment look like? What are we going to do differently as we work together to prepare people to take on that long and arduous task at all levels, with the whole being of the person. So rather than getting locked into given categories of action research or others, we look at the variables, we look at creating that learning practical in a sense, and then we build up what traditions will be useful, what are the contributions of various traditions that exist, and what we might do new. That's what I'm looking forward to. This will take us a couple of months at least, or years to work through, but that's what we're looking at to move ahead.
Hopefully that I think this present conversation is something which we must keep revisiting through the whole lifetime of this program.
Yes.
And beyond. I think we must periodically have a workshop among ourselves. That's really important. And soon probably we'll have our first graduates also to join us in that, because they will have something to say again. Very valuable things to say. So shall we answer the question?
Thank you. I didn't know that. I had to open my mouth and I listened.
Earn your lunch.
Earn my lunch. I don't know where to begin. Actually, in some ways, I think the way Shyam described the whole process, in some ways, been a kind of has been the process inside Pradhan also. That it's I was, I guess, one of the protagonists of putting together Pradhan. There's a whole range of emotions, I guess, which justified the idea because of Pradhan, including a sense of anger, frustration about why things are why are we as a society, as a nation, why is there such why are so many people left out of the progress that we are making? That is just one, but there are many other emotions that came. When I thought of the idea of Pradhan, it was fairly, quite simple response can be, within quotes, institutionalized this rather than just taking off and going to some village and retiring. So that's how Pradhan came into. I had diverse experiences, which I guess at that time, in the 70s, were somewhat unusual. Meeting or knowing about something like the Banker or Band or whatever, the Roadies. That was, today that's not a common, that's a commonplace thing. But at that time it wasn't. So that experience of...
Sorry,
If they can't hear you.
I'll also put off a few fans.
Do we have a mic? Should I bring mic?
Not just the mic, you should have the
Should I make audio on this one?
Well, we can do that after. When we have a key, we can reorganize so that we can hear more. I had also had.
Could you sit here
Just sit here for this.
in Anup's place if you could
It's
exchange.
already occupied this place for prominence. Might as well sit there.
Okay.
Yeah,
actually,
So you can also keep singing. You can come in.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oops.
Sorry.
I'll get a chair for you.
No, I've got a
He's
chair.
already
I've
got
got
a
a chair.
chair
I've got a chair.
He believes in help.
Anyway, this tension between practice, doing things, and having some sense of how does it happen, what is the change process. That I think has been something with Pradhan that's been from the beginning. In fact, I had some exposure to, there used to be I think some sort of a association of American universities. As part of they had one master's program, and they used to take these students, and this is I think something on international relations or something, I can't remember exactly what the theme of that course was, and they would take these students on a 6-month journey through the world, as it were, and by ship, and they would sort of anchor at what was then Madras, and then come inland, travel in India, meet different people, and they had faculty with them. So they were field faculty, like some of you here, and of course they had a full-fledged academic program. So out of 4 semesters, 1 was spent in the field, the other 3 were classroom. I think Michigan was part of it, and I don't know if Yale was part of it. There was some 5-6 universities were there, and I just got to know one of the field faculty. We became good friends. So it kind of struck me as a very interesting idea. And then around that time, also Ravi Mathai, after stepping down as director of IIM Ahmedabad, he had started something called the Rural University, which and he wrote detailed log of what happened, what he did. Basically, they adopted, within quotes, some villages around western Rajasthan, and they would a place called Javaja, and they would Ravi would spend time there, Ranjit Gupta, who was another professor there, would spend some time there, and some of their students would volunteer to do their internships and spend time in those villages. So the rural university was not just the faculty and the students, but the rural university was also the community that they were engaged with. So they would worry about issues of education, of governance, and so on and so forth. But it was basically an attempt at Ravi trying to sort of, for himself, I guess, and for whoever was interested, to to connect with with the change process in which they were participating. So when I think it was 3rd or 4th year of Pradhan, we from day one, incidentally, one of the thoughts that we had in mind was that those who are going to be joining Pradhan, who choose to go and work in villages, this had to be an informed choice. This is that these were people who, after having, jumped in, spent some time in the field, then say that yes, I want to do it. Basically, because we understood as people who had, Vijay of course grew up in cities all his life, but I lived in villages and I lived in cities. We were conscious of the fact that the world out there is very different from the world in which we have been educated, groomed, trained, and so on and so forth. So if you want to go and work there, it may, and in terms of the physical environment and the facilities and so on and so forth. So we thought that if people had to join Pradhan and say, yes, I want to do it, they should first have some experience, some exposure. So we used to have a 3-month, what used to be called an associateship before they joined Pradhan, where anybody who would, we didn't have a method of getting people on board, but by word of mouth, somebody would come and say, I am interested in this. So we would say, okay, go to Gaya, or go to, Guna in MP, or where there was some project going on with some other NGO. And some would, stay on, while others would say, it's not something that I can do. In fact, one of the people who said she couldn't do it is I think has in some ways brought revolutionary changes in India and all over the world in the world of environment. Within a month, within a week, she said, Vijay, ye mere se nahi hoga. I'll go. And 3 years down the road, she became an international, internationally known person who actually has, I think, made huge changes in our consciousness about how to deal with nature, how to, and so on and so forth. So when we, at some point, I think 87, we said, yes, we are going to start a rural university. So Pradhan is going to be a rural university. And this tension always remained because at the end of the day, Pradhan was not a, it's a output or whatever you call it, using management jargon, was not, X number of people who are, graduates of development practice or its output is supposed to be the change that it has stimulated on the ground. How many villages have changed, how many people's lives have changed, and so on and so forth. It's an organization whose business is practiced out there, not, But we, in fact, for a long time, 3-4 years almost, this word, this phrase, rural university, and we attempted, around that time I read this book by Donald Shawn called The Reflective Practitioner, and I found that very interesting. No knowledge of human behavioral psychology or what have you, and I found that book very, very interesting. How he looked at different professions and how they engage in and so on and so forth. So that's the time when we said that we need to have a this associated business, 3 months, getting somebody and throwing them in the deep, and then if they swim, giving them an appointment letter. If they sing, well, bidding them goodbye, was not going to get very far. So that's when we thought of this apprenticeship program, and there we had the good fortune of having somebody like Dipankar, Lord Linton, and Zepari. I was a total ignoramus about all these things. So I remember sitting with Uday Parikh and talking about he taught me about this whole thing about psychology, growing from childhood to adolescence to adulthood, and then to when you become a senior citizen and so on and so forth. So very interesting. Looking back 20-30 years ago, it looks very interesting to me. That's how, we said there needs to be a systematic way of getting people on board, and that these people, we were very clear from the beginning that the person is important, and an understanding of the change process is important. So we focused on both that, what is your emotional makeup? Are you excited about doing this? What motivations, and all these words that I, really don't understand. But my colleagues and friends said this is how you define this. These are important terms. So that's how we designed the apprenticeship program, which looked at both these issues. That what kind of person are you? If this is what you want to do, are you suited for this? And go through the experience of deciding for yourself, and give us also an opportunity to make a judgment, that whether you are that person or not. And then by engaging in the field, practice. About 3-4 years down the road, once the apprenticeship program was on board, we again began to appreciate. Pradhan has had this tradition of having an annual retreat. In fact, in the initial years, we used to have 2 retreats a year, where everybody working in Pradhan would converge, and we would, meet for 4 days, 3.5 days, and exchange experiences, how I have felt, what has happened in the village, and what I was able to do, what I was not able to do, what happened in dealing with the government, and so on and so forth. So all that used to be, and in these discussions, one would often come up to the conclusion that people who had, in the first year, second year, there was a lot of excitement of, doing this, and that in a way carried you forward. You didn't feel at a loss, and there was no discovery, and you were challenging yourself, and so on and so forth. But at some stage, 3rd, 4th, 5th year, you began to sort of add numbers and say, okay, what is it all adding up, and am I, making sense or not? Do I really understand things or not? So this business about that, knowledge part, understanding of, the change process, understanding of, the conceptual basis of all this that I'm trying to do, that is a block that I'm in a way kind of, I can get women together, but I really don't understand why some groups function and others don't. Why is it that the groups met for 3 meetings, 5 meetings, they had very well, but then 6th meeting they were at each other's throat or whatever. So that is something that we need to add, that knowledge dimension to our just bumbling around. Became much more that we realized that the apprenticeship program is not doing that. It is helping people discover themselves, their calling and whatever. Yes, it is helping people to at least have some basic minimum so that not to make a fool of yourself when you go to a village and start doing things. But it's not equipping people to deal, to be a reflective practitioner, to be able to say, this happened, why did this happen, and what do I learn from it, and how should it be done differently tomorrow or the day after or whatever. So that's when we actually then began to think of, enhancing the quality of this. We sort of, in fact, we even went around with a begging bowl and got some money, set up a small campus in Kesla. Many of you have been there. Most of you have been there. And those old, red brick buildings that you see there were sort of, we said, it's not going to be possible for us to get universities to marry us. That we have to kind of do something, put things together in a kind of a trial error method. And we thought that we would get some, learned people to engage with us periodically. That it may not be possible for us to engage in a full time, but some crazy professor in some crazy university like AUD might say, yeah, I'm willing to spend 3 weeks with you and interact with your apprentices or your professionals or what you do, and we can. So we thought that we would put together a program for sort of people, early mid-career kinds of people who had 3, 4, 5 years of experience on the ground and therefore have burning questions, where they can really challenge the knowledge people that, tell me why does this happen, help me analyze this or understand this. But that didn't unfortunately go very far. And we kept struggling with this issue that we've got to marry a university, we've got to find somebody in the academic world who would take this idea seriously that we don't have any place, I think, in the world where this social change process is researched and taught as a profession, So I thought that is something that program is in the best position to take on that responsibility and look around and find people who will engage with it. And we tried various obvious choices were IRMA, and another obvious choice was TIS in Bombay, because they claim to be institutes which are focused on change process, on rural process development, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, they were not particularly forthcoming, and we tried with IEG. One fundamental challenge was we were on our side, maybe as ignoramuses, maybe as bumbling fools, were very clear that this education process has to have some engagement with the field. That you can't, that you're not learning about history, that you are learning about change as it happens and trying to understand that, build knowledge around that. Understanding of history and context and all that is important. That's very, very important. But that's not all, that's not enough for you to move forward. You've got to have some understanding of the process of change. And for that, I should have thought of that being an engineer, because especially being a mechanical engineer, I should have thought that that's how it is, because when you look at one of the things that I have done in my life, sort of fleetingly, was to understand the process of friction. What happens at the interface between two surfaces when they are rubbed together, which is a change process. But somehow I didn't make that connect now, which I can make now. So we were there, and unfortunately, the university, the knowledge building tradition, the knowledge imparting tradition, does not, except in a few disciplines like I guess medicine does that. Engineering to a minuscule level does that, but not really, and then it's eroding now over the years. That knowledge is in the classroom, it's in the library, it's in the mind of the professor. That is the sort of tradition. That to convince some university and to convince our regulators like UGC and what have you, that look, yes, there is knowledge that resides in the books and in the minds of the professors and in the classrooms of the university, but there is also knowledge that's out there as things unfold. And therefore, the education program needs to combine that experience of being a party to that change process and simultaneously also taking that raw experience and processing it, sitting next to a professor who can, probably connect with the concepts and so on and so forth. So because of that, I guess we were kind of coming to a deadlock wherever we went to anybody to say, can you partner with us? That's where I guess the heavens opened and we landed up at AUD in their Dwarka campus at that time, met with Shyam and other friends here. Hani came and spent time in our Nitibag office, and we sort of, when I remember when we met her, I said, "Lagta ban gaya," because we thought that we could connect with her, that she, we were on the same page, to use the technique phrase which is very common these days. So that's how this this idea is. Now it's still work in progress. Very much work in progress. And in some ways, I think together what AUD and Pradhan are attempting to do, and what all of you and others who are participating in this, including the students, not to forget them, we are actually on, we're trying to discover something. So there's no, there are no set formats, there is no set, the last year's batch was different from this year's batch, the next year might be very different too. And we've got to live with that. I say that with some, and I think we can do that. I say that with some confidence that's born out of what we've gone through Pradhan. And from where we were to where we are, I think, it's been a journey of, retooling yourself, rediscovering yourself, and, falling down and standing, learning how to stand on your feet again and again. So that, I think, that's where we are today. That this endeavor together, it's not about, educating 25 youngsters. It's not about publishing a few papers or writing a few theses. It's actually about developing a new concept, new pedagogy, and creating a new academic, quasi-academic or reflective practice space, where the contribution that people in the field make and the contribution that, So I think one part which is very, very important for especially people coming from Pradhan to take home and to be very, very mindful of is that it's not about teaching a youngster, how to talk in a self-help group, or about, what should be the spacing between paddy plants when you are doing SRI. That may be adequate for an apprentice. We are on a different, venture. So I think that's something and therefore, the way we engage with these youngsters, not that I'm not saying that we shouldn't engage with the apprentices this way too. We should. But in this case, we need to be doubly careful that we are actually engaging with students who, together with us and the faculty here, are on a journey of discovery. That there is no, there isn't what that would mean is that we need to be open, we need to be willing to experience differences, we need to be willing to raise questions, ask questions, but never to shut off. That, I think, we go with the attitude that this young woman or this young man is actually good for nothing, unlikely to fit in Pradhan. That's the end of the matter. It's not going to go anywhere. So we've got to be very, very conscious that this is work in progress, where all of us are, in some ways, least of all me, but all of you certainly are in the process of building a new profession. Not just building a new profession, but actually a new idea of education, a new idea of knowledge building, a new idea of transmitting knowledge from one set of people to another set of people, an idea of helping people to learn, a new way of helping people to learn. So I think it's to me it's a great endeavor, but all of us here need to be conscious that we are in the business of discovery, and that to me I think is so the end of the outcome, or whatever the various management wallahs say, is not how many students graduated and what pieces they did, but that that we have pushed the frontiers of knowledge building and learning and the whole idea of pedagogy and so on and so forth. Pradhan in some ways did a part of that, which is to kind of, today when I learned about Aruna Roy, somebody who was in the IAS and chucked it and went and lived with her husband in a remote desert of Rajasthan. That was, you sort of eye popped out. Today, it's, I think, much more commonplace that urban, educated young men and women, instead of heading towards a corporate job or a government job would go and do something in places where people like them are not supposed to go. That idea, I think, to an extent, we have Pradhan has contributed. I think together, and that the endeavor that I'm talking about can't be done alone by Pradhan. It can't be done alone by the university. This is where I think we need to be very clear that together we are taking it forward. Tomorrow there will be other partners, other NGOs will join, other universities might join. So that, so basically the road that we've chosen is one of discovery, where there will be, all kinds of, problems and difficulties and emotional ups and downs and so on and so forth. And if we do it with that kind of a spirit, that this is not kind of some, we're not moving on a, as per a design, but we're actually putting together a design. I think we would all probably, contribute something very, very significant. So I hope we have, tomorrow unfortunately I'm not going to be able to come, but whatever happens today, I'm delighted that so many of us are. Thank you. So I can go to my other prominence now.
I just want to add something to what Deep said. See, I have not articulated this thought. Suddenly it occurred to me. See, university in general, and particularly in the social sciences, I think we have a university means talking about university in these parts of the world, including India, and particularly in the social sciences, we are actually having a problem. The problem is that of our own self-ascribed position as generators of new knowledge. Because we still are suffering from the what may be called the hangover of the colonial traditions, and then we really feel that it's our job is basically to ventilate this grand explanatory systems developed elsewhere, and try and understand to what extent our local realities fit into that. And our basic audience for our own, we consider our professional peer group as this international fraternity of psychologists, sociologists, political scientists, or whoever, to whom we are aspiring to become a respected members of. So we are all aspiring to get onto the high table. In the process, what happens is that what we generate seem to be a knowledge of authenticity. By land, I'm not making generalizations. I mean, here I'm just having some broad stroke comments about, and this is self-critical. We seem to be sort of, our engagement seems to be not enough in the reality that is unfolding in our own backyard, so to say. So, I don't know whether I'm making sense. It's important, therefore, for us to, when we have, for instance, when we think of even a new discipline like development studies, development practice, we again regress to looking for traditions of development studies that we developed in, 50 years back in England, and try and see what are the kinds of contours of such programs and contours of that new discipline, and stick to that. We don't seem to be confident enough to propose our own basic maps. It's actually we are only the job we seem to be doing is actually filling in details of some maps which are developed elsewhere. Our job seems to be mostly in terms of embellishing certain basic formats which are intellectual structures which have been proposed and created elsewhere. So that is not something which is going to take us very far. the universities such as ours, new universities, I think need to really go into not only new pedagogy but also new epistemologies. So that is that, and I would certainly consider this as an opportunity to do that. So this whole dichotomy, first of all, I mentioned a little earlier about structures that govern field practice, field immersion. As I said, when the Pradhan is already in the field working, it has got a certain structure, it has got certain processes in place, it has got certain ideologies in place. So that I think that is a kind of scaffolding structure within which we expect our aspirant professionals to be trained. Similarly, in the university also we have, when we think of just like we don't throw somebody into the field and say that you fend for yourself, make sense for yourself. We don't do that. We engage them in a structured manner, and we think that we need to handhold them through that structured manner. And self-help group and all those things become the basic ingredients of that approach. In a similar manner, in the university also, when we think of exposing them to new ideas related to development processes or social transformation, we don't just push them into the library and say that you find for yourself. I mean, we also have a pre-structured stuff, and the problem is that much of this pre-structured stuff which through which I think we have created this curriculum lacks to some extent the authenticity that it should have. I think so it's a progressive process through which I think we have to gain this authenticity, and this authenticity can come only if we do away with the barrier that is artificially existing between the field guides and the faculty. In the sense, I have a feeling that this is a partnership not only in pedagogy, this is not a partnership just in constituting a new profession, it is also a partnership in knowledge generation, which I really feel that without this distinction getting blurred, and more and more AUD faculty becoming field guides, and more and more field guides becoming like faculty, I don't see any other way in which it can happen. We do not have a theory of how it can be done. All that we have is actually the theory of what we call regulation. I mean, those of us who have learned physics would know there's something called, if you fuse two cubes of ice together, it will become one. The process of that I think that concept is called regulation, isn't it? Mechanical engineering. So we feel that put people under one roof and perforce make them interact with one another, then something synthetic will emerge, or something organic will emerge together. So that is the assumption with which we are going. But all I'm trying to say is that this is not just about the objective of this entire endeavor is not just limited to development practice as a profession or this MPhil program or just that. It is actually it's about a new epistemology that needs to be. Epistemology which is largely based on a struggle to make sense of complicated transformative processes that we actually not only see, experience, but actually participate in. So when you actually participate in it, plunge neck deep in it, then the struggle of making sense of it, I think that is a very important process which we should not lose sight of. Why don't you say that?
Yes.
Please say that.
I was just thinking many times when I come for development practice meetings, I feel that it is really like a parallel set of issues that we are dealing with in another program in this university, which is also about creating a new kind of a reflective practitioner, and that is in the psychotherapy MPhil program. So just now while Shyam was speaking, Swanup and I made a little diagram that we thought that we had begun with a
a deep-going, inward-looking, reflective practitioner in the making of a psychoanalyst, and as we began working with it, we realized that on the one hand, we had to think about the community, how does this engage with the whole idea of community work. On the other, we had to reckon with how did faith, religion come into the entire healing process. Then somewhere else, non-religious spirituality, how does that become a whole part of the culture. On the other side, the medical science models of the hospital and the individual, then the family, then the culture, then the folk traditions, then the indigenous ways of understanding the human mind. So, I think within that program also we are battling with so many things, which is about what is the kind of education that emerges from an intrinsic relationship with life and living, rather than a kind of nature education which has pre-theorized the process itself. So I think this whole thing, I would agree with what Shyam is saying, it's not just about one MPhil program, it is about reimagining education, in its interlinkages with, that was all I was thinking.
And in fact, yesterday morning's presentation,
yeah, one more, if I can just add, so that's why yesterday and day before we had concluded, last night we concluded what we called as the Mental Health Day celebration for this year. So this time we thought about how to look at knowledge systems which are usually relegated as non-knowledge or discarded knowledge. That is the knowledge of the patient and the caretaker, not the knowledge of the expert, but the one who has gone through mental anguish. What are they bringing us? How are they challenging us? The one who lives with the patient. Not just that we tell them some points that this is what we need to do with it, but for instance, one of the caretaker who came, I really felt he left me with something. He said, I know all the theories in psychology, and he came from AIIMS hospital where his brother was 5 weeks admitted with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia for the last 18 years, and he said 8 months it has taken me and I have not been able to convince him to have a bath. Ultimately, they are saying that they will force him to have a bath, but no theory in psychiatry or psychology or other thing no professional has been able to help me with the actual dilemma of caretaking beyond a certain point. So I think that is what the intersection we were trying to look at, that some knowledges are respected and some knowledges are always taken as non-knowledge. So how do these two begin to speak to each other? So I think something like that when we engage within the field of rural practice and rural life, some viewpoints are considered to be as legitimate and some we consider as delegitimized in the process, and a dialogue between them two.
That's actually, it's, in the present day context of India, that's an extremely, extremely important, as we, this whole thing about, this sort of recent example of this Niyamgiri hills, which have bauxites, and these silly tribals, they want to, and you go and look at it, I've been to one of the villages there, and you look at them, there are scrawny people, with just one dhoti to wear. Wouldn't it be nice if they got, a bit of money to live happily ever after? But they are crazy and they are saying, oh, they want this Niyam Raja is important. So this tension, so if you talk to a financial, an investment banker, he will say, well, what is this? These guys are fools, I can give them, lots of money and they can live happily, they can have big house and so on and so forth. But they are stuck with their Niyam Raja. So this, this is another very interesting anecdote somebody shared with me. So, if you look at a person who has no assets, no resources, no job, etc., etc., we would have a sense of what that person might think as being the most sort of painful, difficult thing for that person. Somebody did some sort of just chatted with people, some landless people in Bihar, Dalit community. Asked him, what is the most difficult experience that you have? And his answer was, my most difficult experience is to kind of teach little child to go hungry with just a glass of, to go to bed with just a glass of water in the street. Now, so if you look at reality from this man's perspective, we would have thought, oh, his most difficult thing is to get a job or to earn money or to, etc., etc. But he says, well, my most difficult experience is really to teach my small children to go to bed with just a glass of water in their stomach. Now, we would not, with all our understanding and so on, we would not think that this is, so we would not be conscious of these, So that's, I think that's very important.
We have to break for tea, Rajesh, right? Vinod has something to add. I will also request actually Professor Nagpal to come in a little bit, because this program would not have been possible without 3 people in this room at least. One is Professor Menon, but the other 2 are Hani and Professor Nagpal. No.
From AUD side.
From AUD side. No, that's what I'm saying. From our, yeah, it is a fact. Let us accept it. Let us not hide it.
Maybe.
Today I'm not hiding things. No. Let's not go on adding names. And I think you should also come in, but after Vinod.
Like on the fringe of an experience, but as I was sort of listening to you, there was this thought that was coming quite often to my mind. It's a relationship between power and innocence, and how do we view and tolerate the innocence of the other? I'm very afraid of wanting to be a part of it, because I feel against the field experience and the reality, I stand nowhere. I'm so flawed, and yet there is so within my structure of survival, there are a certain set of also expectations which I fail to make sense of, and I try to live my life with students and probably through their struggles. So it will fit in the system. The other appeals quite a bit, but one is also scared. And one is not often very critical about the power structure within. So sometimes one feels, well, as a being, will I end up also serving as an auto-critique of the other? Or I will also be critiqued of my own power structure. And that's something it does to the innocence. To me, the 2 people conjoining is only when we value the innocence of each other. Otherwise, that I don't know, and that's something Zion. Somewhat to me, partnerships are about that. And if there is something around that, one can make sense. One will feel. Otherwise, it's like. So the imagination of who could be a teacher who could then work with a field with the same amount of wrongness is a. Would it be only possible to imagine the young teachers who with their new ideas are trying to toy to win things, and then trying to say, okay, look, I can do things, and then meet one's own limitations? Or if an old teacher were to engage the same experience and also reach the state of, I don't know the answer. I also don't know the answer. So how will that experience be understood? And how will a youngsters or limited imagination of ये सब कर सकता है ऐसा ऐसा नहीं है कि theoretically काफ़ी जेन्युइन इश्यूज पे बहुत सुलझा हुआ जवाब है, क्योंकि उसमें ज़िंदगी की अपनी बीइंग से एमिनेट होता है, आंसर नहीं होता. सो आई डोंट नो वन कैन engineer some difficult conversations to be a part, be with that humility. So ये ह्यूमिलिटी का जो एहसास मुझे ऐसा लगता है जब फील्ड में काम करते हैं वो एक तरह का ह्यूमिलिटी लाता है, लेकिन वो एक ह्यूमिलिटी भी अगर पता नहीं रैशनल पोजीशन से इमीडिएटली अगर कोई अटैक करे तो उस पर एरोगेंस भी आता है कि कहते हैं मुझे क्या पता, it's not seeming easy. So I'm just trying to make sense of. So I'm here to also just to be in the margins to make sense of what would then action mean, what would then research mean. For me, these two are extremely important. So sometimes at higher levels, you see that the innocence is not talked about. Innocence is value, it's not talked about, and also sometimes power is extremely not negotiable. So. Within two colleagues who are operating in the field, I may see somebody more powerful, and if I can articulate it, then somebody within the field setting, suppose if somebody is able to provide a lot of resources to the NGO, may be epistemically more powerful through action itself. Will that be questioned? That is it so? I don't know. I'm feeling very muddled, but है कुछ concretely है, कभी तो कोई dialogue meet नहीं होता. तो वन often feels कि आइडियलिज्म का भी लिमिट्स है, आइडियलिज्म का एक उठता हुआ नज़र आता है, उसके साथ उठता हुआ नज़र आते हुए साथ रह के मेरे वो रिसर्च लग रहा है, बट आई डोंट नो if that can be made sense. I want to hear something around that.
Actually, I wasn't very ready. I thought
No, it's okay.
But what
You can come in again in the next session.
I may not be there. But I made some points which I will certainly respond to maybe through writing this time. But on occasions when I've been a part of these processes, I did feel that without fully knowing it or becoming conscious of it, I would take a position to see where the hope about a program is threatening some mindset, and find that I'm quite lucky to see that this hope is not as easily lost as the threatened mindset believes it can be lost. Whether this is either way, I could somehow feel that I could glimpse something, so I could voice it. Today, listening to Shyam and Deep, I see a different spirit. I think the spirit is closer to what I would call as the sacred element. Shyam at one point said that one voice, and then he, typical to himself, tried to lose that stance, thinking that this one voice can be a very possessive stance. I feel that the spirit of one voice is something that we are lucky to touch. Whenever we touch it, we feel blessed. So we should be able to touch it the way Shyam touched it, and then open ourselves up to many voices. But the stance of one voice, I feel, is a very crucial one. And one is to learn how to sort of own it. So we produced a crisis of sorts by touching that. And then he reverted back to it again when he spoke about a new epistemology and not just new pedagogy. Similarly, in Deep's things, especially when he came to the work of the reflective practitioner work, it's a very, very interesting, and I thought there was a keenness to reach greater, finer expression of that, communicate that, but somehow Pete must have also become conscious of not taking too much of time, that he often does, and so again cut it short. Another critical moment was the tradition of retreats, where that Pradhan has been practicing, so all would converge there. I feel that what Honey has shared a little bit about this batch of students this time, how they're so very vocal, and how they're so very vocal as to almost make the teacher feel, at least the university teacher feel, I don't know about the field teachers, that the assertion is close to violence. Sometimes.
And among themselves also.
For me,
Among themselves, actually more.
Not to
for
the
me,
teachers.
yeah. For me, even one act of violence is like a movement down the vaginal labyrinth. Something needs to be born. So that's the first. For me, that's the way I see it. So when Deep said that in those retreats, people were at each other's throats, and then the track changes. I think perhaps new epistemology is there. It's closer there when people are and many voices, acknowledging that they have come together almost mandatory to the retreat. So if action research workshops as a module emerge, my plea would be and my effort would be to locate those moments. What is happening in those moments where extreme violence is being held back by the sacred element that we are all a part of the team, but a small violence or a somewhat upsetting violence which upstages things is not held back. I think we are, in some ways, we should count our luck that people with divergent backgrounds come and want to express how they would like to identify with the program and gel into one voice for some time. And then if the violence doesn't happen, then I would think that it's a compliant process. It is not really. So violence is a must, I think. That's why the first act of violence is a far more potential challenge than many acts of violence having been lost because we do not want to look at it or we do not know how to look at it, and so we qualify it. So for me, the best image of the violence is sometimes to say this violence is needing to be evacuated. So somebody should say, yeah, that's a good gift. And that's where the innocence is retained. When one has done a good job of evacuating something, you can really feel like a healthy baby who says, "Ab kuch aur chahiye khane ko." I would think that this program for me is reaching the point where a new epistemology will emerge, and the frameworks that we are using in this, as I see it from a distance, are quite well calculated, well poised to do that. Let's see how we can still sort of work on it. That's the way.
I just wanted to correct a wrong metaphor which I used. Because I realized that some of the metaphors come also because of some unconscious thing. So I was just seeing this, how can two different traditions begin to see more, begin to understand each other or begin to get merged with each other. I was, of course, I used this word about regulation, two cubes of ice being pushed together. I thought that was a very, very coercive, administrative kind of area. I would rather use this metaphor of ethyl alcohol and water. You take fume ethyl alcohol and and water, a liter of each of them, and add. Then what you will get is not 2 liters. Actually, you get about 1.2 liters because you have the ethyl alcohol and water have gone into each other's intermolecular spaces. In similar manner, I think when two communities meet, yeah, this is much better.
Now it's like ice.
Because I think we need to really interpenetrate, if I may use that word, or enter the perspective. And so, in operational terms, I would love to see in the years to come the AUD faculty spending more time in the field, and the field guides spending more time here in the university. So I think that's how we have to get into this intermolecular spaces, and then I think we begin to have more meaningful partnerships in the generation of knowledge, and also because as I don't see the distinction between generating knowledge and initiating a community of aspirants into the profession. I think both are in a way same process. I mean, while you initiate a young set of people into the profession, you are also generating knowledge in the process. It's not like a finished product being thrust down somebody's throat. So I would like to see this happening more and more. I mean, in the design of our collaboration, I feel there should be built into it a possibility of this kind of, for want of another word, interpenetration. See, I think I was also wondering, is there some way in which I think the field guides talk a bit about the student? They have already had a exposure of, in the sense they have had the opportunity of actually doing a bit of hand-holding to our own students in the first two
A lot of opportunity, 7 months
they
living
have.
with them.
Yes. So I think it's important for you to sort of talk about this because that's where the shoe pinches.
Thanks for telling that actually. I was saying the word worked also.
What is it?
Well, it is bubbling inside, I want to share, but I just
It's important to do
I
that.
just thought this paper, I don't know why, it didn't mean so. I thought there lots of presentations will happen after years and anyways, what everything means, everyone will mean.
Just look at this as a tentative.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
We are already far beyond. But I was just saying, some terminology actually checks us, so it's my understanding. And some terminology definition in dictionary also. This student is something which checks. But what my experience with this, and from the very beginning when this was launched also, this is not exactly someone is studying and someone is teaching like they are not student exactly. They didn't happen to be, they didn't present in front of us also like a student. I remember from the day in Pradhan also, this laptop is now loaded with many documents. Every topic I Google, I collect from this, then I read it, then I again go back to the field, I do my experiments, then I come back, discuss with this kind of thing. Now this journey always needs a partner. In our team we have some people with whom we reflect, we again go back and do. But here I found more interesting with huge knowledge, conceptual knowledge they get from this campus, then they go back to the field. Then again we like a debate with each other, we struggle with each other. They have a small limited area of a village of few group of women to exercise, but they are conceptualized, but we together discussing their conceptualized. I might have a, as far as the geographic area is concerned, a big, but this experiments was happening in few years back also when they were not, and since the initial months they have been experiment. Actually that is the main, I would say, blood of this whole system is that, and also adding different persons, as I shared, Shyam has also mentioned that someday may happen that every faculty will be in the field or this field faculty in the field. It is not there because you have some knowledges, you have then put into another person's mind, then the person is again going and doing it. You again reflect that whatever concepts you have given or you have the person accepted, what happens on the field exactly. That is the ultimate ground what comes out of every concept of the field. The same thing happening there also, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting because apprenticeship is also like that. It's nothing much more different with that. But the knowledge of concept is huge here. Every day I will find a write-up in mail, then you have to read and come back. I also read it. Not much of them. I don't have so much. But very interesting write-ups to work on. I read it, I discuss with that, and this is what I say. And there is also a scope of experimenting it, you are getting it, and the results are happening also. Very interesting.
Maybe we can start after the reflections from our faculty.
Yes.
Like, what were the action research questions?
And also from the teachers who are actually teaching some courses with the, because let's see something called the rural, or what is it called? Understanding the rural. I mean, how does this understanding the rural yeah. They have to tell us now. Oh, they haven't yet signaled.
As I was listening to almost everybody here, an anecdote came to mind. This is about my mother, who was 84 years old, was admitted to a heart institute and was supposed to undergo angiography the next day. Something was amiss. One is that she's 84 years old. Why does she need to be subjected to angiography at this age? So my wife said, look, we need to talk to somebody. Now this is at about, say tomorrow is Thursday, I still remember the day. And this conversation is taking place about 9 o'clock in the evening on Wednesday. So I asked her, whom do we contact? Now she happened to know Srinath Reddy, who was the chief of cardiology in AIIMS. So she called him up. This was already 10:30 at night. He picked the phone up and he said, I'm in a movie hall. Today is my wedding anniversary, I'm in a movie hall. So can I speak to you a little later? So she quickly said that we need to talk to you. He said, okay, come at 11 o'clock at night. So he used to live in Horse at those days, so we went at 11 at night to his place. We had taken the ECGs, and he looked at, he has not seen my mother, he has not seen the patient, he doesn't know anything about her, he just looked at the ECGs. And then he said, she hasn't had a heart attack. She doesn't need an angiogram. What she might at best need, this is whatever is shown in the ECG is because of electrical malfunctioning. Now I am a layman, so he drew up the diagram of a heart, he showed me the 4 chambers, and he told me as to how electrical pulse flows from one to the other, and what exactly is happening. And then finally he said, at best she might need a pacemaker, if at all. Okay. So, in half an hour's time, I don't become a heart expert. But he being a professor, he knew the diagrams and he, enough for me to understand. So I said, look, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, they're going to wheel her in. So what do I do? He said, take her out of the hospital. I said, but what if they don't allow me? May I had his phone number. Would you be willing to speak to the doctors? He said, yes. But just before leaving, he said, but they won't like to speak. So fine. Next day morning, we landed at 8:45. There are 2 surgeons there. So I had to spend half an hour convincing them that I don't want, we had paid the deposit, whatever money had to be paid and so on and so forth. Spend half an hour convincing them that, I don't want this angiogram. So they kept saying, this is a very normal procedure, nothing much is going to happen, and so on and so forth. Then eventually I had to say, would you like to speak to Dr. Srinath Reddy? The moment they heard the name, they said, no, Chad. We don't want to speak to her, but you can now take her out. So they wrote on the discharge, Lama, left against medical advice. Fortunately, my mother got out of that hospital. She didn't go back to that hospital ever since. I'm narrating this story because here is a person, to me this epitomizes a professional, who knows his theory so well that even without looking at the patient, he can tell you, but just by looking at those things, that what exactly is the matter, and to a layman like me can explain to me well enough to develop enough conviction that I can withstand 2 surgeons of the National Heart Institute who are eminent people, who are hell-bent on doing that angiography the next day and get my mother out. It's my mother. She would have died. But I think that's the hallmark of a profession, that the person is able to integrate theory and practice and can do that at 11:30 at night on his marriage anniversary without blinking an eye, and producing conviction in me that something can actually be done. I think what is integrated has been differentiated by us. I integrated in the sense of this theory and practice. I never understand this. I don't understand this distinction. That this pedestal fan over there moves, that's practice, all right. But that it moves without a theory of electromagnetism, I think is my ignorance. I may not know it. But this whole business of, I think somewhere when we are teaching or when we are practicing, either way, I mean, why is it that a person doesn't ask as to how these are connected? They are not, for instance, this entire narration, and when Ashok was summing it up, and he talked about this whole business of the violence and how that is an indicator of movement, and that is almost necessary for movement to take place. Now, why is it that that lateritic soil has to be tilled, has to be furrowed before you can sow a seed? I guess it's very simple. You can't do it otherwise. So the whole business of this fusion, actually the integration already exists. To my mind, the business is not one of forging two things together. We have actually, in our minds, we have differentiated them in our heads. So it's a kind of mental stance that if I'm inside the classroom, I am talking about a differentiated part. I'll give you another incident. One young man was going to teach a class for the first time in his life. And so before he was going, so I asked him, what is the mental stance with which we're going inside this class? He said, look, these are students, who are, it's a past course thing. And these are students who will not be interested in the subject. He will have no questions. And all of you teachers know that if students don't have questions, the class is a dull class. So I said, why do you assume that? He said, because, these are students, that subject is not taken up by bright students in any case. It's taken up by people who haven't got admission anywhere else. Stuff like that. So I said, all right, what if you change your, think differently? That the subject that you're going to teach is something that is related to life on a daily basis. So everybody has some problems, some issues, something like that. What if you start with that and ask them, you come to this class, what problems are you facing today? Right now, since morning, what have you faced? And then I hope some people in class of 15 or 20 will, some people will start speaking. And then if you are able to relate that to whatever topic you were supposed to teach, what would happen to the class? So after he came back, I asked him, I said, what happened? And lo and behold, it's a past course class. Some teacher of his rang up some teacher of mine, who eventually said something else has happened. This past course class has the highest amount of attendance. Now, I think as a person who is either practicing or teaching, so if I'm a practicing person, I ask my carpenter, so why do you suggest that this particular dovetail joint is the best joint possible in this circumstance? He's able to give me a theory for it. He's able to say how the stresses will be balanced, how this will happen, that will. So this is an integrated thing. There can be no worthwhile professional or academic, for that matter, without having this integration fused in the mind. I think when I'm talking about, I mean, this is where actually Pradhan, coming back a little bit to Pradhan has been, rightly or wrongly, that's a different debate, but they've always been talking about that unless you do something to the person, no sustainable change is possible. Now that all of you therapists and psychotherapists will be saying the same thing. Something has to happen inside the self of the person. So they have been talking about sense of agency for donkey's years. They have been talking about sense of well-being, not agency. When they talk about agency, you might land up with a petrol pump agency and so on and so forth, and that will produce development. But they've been talking about sense of agency and sense of well-being, not so material well-being therefore. So therefore only supplying money or clothes or shelter is not adequate, or sanitation for that matter. So this they have been talking for a long time. Now when they started thinking about a collaboration, now obviously Deep has already mentioned that went to TIS and IG and so on and so forth. Nobody seems to be bothered about thinking about this aspect of development. And it was quite by accident that there was a draft paper written about, I think, the School of Human Studies that I happened to chance to read. And I suddenly came back to Deep and Niveda. I said, look, this is the place to pursue. Then of course we knew Ashok and Honey for quite some time before. So we called them, they're extremely reluctant. We know nothing about rural, we know nothing about development. We know a little bit about change in people, but that too in the urban setting. How are we going to fit? I mean, they haven't said all this. It took a lot of wooing for them to actually come to at least the table to even agree to. They listened, of course, but agree to in some way collaborate. Then, of course, Shyam came on the scene, and of course, we were absolutely lucky that this is a kind of a group that got together. And it's peculiar because, they could have gone, Pradhan could have gone to a school of development studies or could have gone to some other studies. It actually started to focus on the school of human studies. Basically, and that question is still to be pursued. That sense of agency and which Pradhan, and Pradhan, I think, in that sense, has, today a lot of people are talking about it, beginning to talk about it. Sense of well-being is being talked about by many people, but nobody's talking about the sense of well-being. If you read carefully, they're talking about well-being, but not sense of well-being. And that's where I think Pradhan and Ashok and Honey, actually, they kind of came together to, and then for the other part is that the tenor of the university seemed to be one that it wanted to do something different, not different as in Maggie sauce, that it's, why is it important because it's different, but it's that it wants to set. I think this was touched upon both by Deep as well as Shyam in terms of saying that we want to have an education which has meaning and worth. I was amazed today while coming to this place, Nivedita shared with me that not a single student from mechanical engineering in IIT Delhi actually found placement as a mechanical engineer.
This year. Yeah.
This year. Yeah. Not a single student from IIT Delhi this year found placement as a mechanical engineer. Or any core sector job. Now we obviously don't want to, one never got the impression that AUD was into that league. It was interested in producing, churning out students. So whether they find jobs or not is not the issue. But the issue is that when you are looking at developing a different kind of a culture, a different kind of a way of thinking about education and dissemination and integration and so on, I think every classroom or every field needs to improve. What Saroj said just a while ago is a small indication of that whether you're in the field, but the field people have to also start. And the youngsters who go to the field, I think they come up with all kinds of different explanations for the phenomenon that they see right in front of their eyes. So that integration is something I thought that AUD was already, it was kind of not only young but willing to be different. And so no matter what apprehensions they might have had in terms of the beginning, I think, but consistently, they have kind of constantly said that we are willing to be different. The other thought I had was that, I don't know, this is a larger issue to my mind. Subsystem change is difficult to sustain. So if only in the school of development practice you are attempting to do something in terms of either epistemology or pedagogy, which is different, I would imagine that as a kind of a organization, it will be difficult to sustain that. So, whatever discussions we have, interactions we have, perhaps it needs, because if you're really wanting to be a university of a different kind, then I think it's a larger issue. It's not just development practice and the way we think about this. For instance, I was just wondering that these students are going to, this workshop is organized around the theme of action research. And I was just wondering that these students are going to go to the field. And of course, I think all of us have a responsibility of helping them hone their research projects and look at variables and so on and so forth. What are we thinking about when they come back? Even though that might be nascent, that might be half-baked or semi-baked, but these students, providing a platform that these students are opened up to a field of development practitioners, some seminar of that kind, that these are the kinds of stuff. You see, the point is that the practitioner often thinks that whatever he is doing or she is doing can't be put into terms of variables and causal variables and intervening variables and so on. why can't we do something where it presents to the world, to the developing world to begin with at least, a different way of looking at what they're doing?
Yes.
And I think these students provide a tremendous opportunity. And it's a different kind of engagement. It's a different kind of engagement of the mind that the students are. So while we might be helping students to sharpen their projects, something of that kind, so that it's not just that they have to finish a certain dissertation. It is that they are active contributors to shaping the way the development world thinks about issues that confront. And whatever little I've seen of these students, I think right now I have in mind, of course, the current, I mean, the kind of excitement they brought to the table was very amazing. The kind of so the practitioner is his mind, his whole mind, body, and soul is engaged in that particular kind of vocation, that kind of particular kind of endeavor. That comes forth, and I think we need to do something to build upon that. So my thought about this is, in my mind, what is integrated already, we first differentiate it and then we say, okay, now we need to integrate it together. So I would say, if you look at any of these fields as integrated, I mean, it's okay that I don't know something about some part of that, but that doesn't mean that the theory is theory and practice is practice, and twin never shall meet. So that's hardly debatable. And that, I think, is a lacuna I find in many other systems. I've been kind of many years ago I did my management, and unfortunately, no good practitioner of management ever came to teach. Well, they're lost touch with their theory. But no good theoretician or teacher in the classroom ever went to practice in a commercial organization to find out what the realities of that organization is and how to cope with that. And I think that's a huge gap. And it's not because these two are different, but it's because you and I have thought about it differently. So, thank you.
Each narration, Dipankar, especially of a personal crisis in which one is felt on the verge of some kind, each narration, I think, represents a certain hope of reaching some better emerging integration. So if one were to look back at those narrations, there is something that we can gain from it. So could it be that we can say that each time we touch a student of ours or a student in us touches a crisis of the kind that is comparable to you thinking about your mother's difficulty at the later? So that's the first element that I see in the narration, for us to see how to look at violence other than just violence which blocks us. That we have narrated a model and we are willing to change the model when this model shows that there is a lacuna. But till then this might be of some use. So I would look for the narration of a crisis in somebody, whether it's a student, as I said, or a teacher. In the second anecdote, it was a teacher. Subsequently, this narration of a crisis is looking for a presence which I think is very difficult for the modern minds to fully own. And I'm not underplaying the difficulty. That's what I refer to as the sacred. The sacred for me is not just the one that makes us look up to, but sacred for me is also something that makes me forget that I created something. So each time I erase something that I've done, I think the sacred is emerging in its most primal hue, which is that it can't be easily deciphered, let alone communicated with others. So each time a student brings a crisis and creates a narration, he looks for something which is sacred. So he tests us out, the system, in terms of the sacred. And the sacred has to find, even on a wedding anniversary, the oneness to say, meet me at 11:30. So there is no discontinuity. I'm in a cinema hall, you would appreciate that. I'm giving you a chance without any special sense of giving it to you. It's part of my dedication. So you come at 11:30. So the moment the sacred arrives, I find that the agency is not particularly sought for. So he's saying, yes, I'm willing to talk to them, but they may not talk to you. If you look at it's not humility of a typical kind, it's very atypical humility. Recognizes that the other person may not bring a possibility of intervention. And still, what I'm saying is a conviction, and that conviction will go into you and create the agency. So the elements that I can see in the narration are worth looking at. Each time there is a crisis, the presence of the sacred to be looked for. How does the sacred not actively directly intervene, but enable us to see that he is a part of us, the sacred is a part of us, and promotes the agency in us. It is not typically power laden, It has its innocence, because it is connecting, engaging, without giving us the sense that I'm too lonely, I've been left to fend for things like this. The most important thing that I think we have not mentioned is that did this hospital authority give back the money or not?
That they did. Fortunately, they hadn't encashed the draft.
That's very important. That's where the sacred shows that the presence was accomplished or it was commercially dictated. So the sacred may have to then wait for a far greater time to see how far it can reach. But since they gave the thing, I think we should give them an applause somewhere.
Yeah.
So I would see that violence is in that sense a special doorway to make us look at the sacred, in which we are also playing a part, but to the extent that we can acknowledge to play a part, a new mental structure can be created, which is what you demonstrated, that you went and could argue for half an hour, as if equipped with the authority of the sacred, to say, this is what I want, and this is what is my inner voice, my mother, her life, my engagement. So you can use models like these to see each time a narration happens, the element of crisis, what is it looking for, what does it say in me, how in my own personal, I'm just repeating that to sort of create a chance of this being recorded in our memories, because it is a wonderful gift to come after I left the sacred uncollected in my own narration.